Hello and welcome. I wanted this video to be a bit more of a podcast vibe, so I've tried a mic, but I'm not too happy with it, but my house is quite busy at the moment, so the audio would be worse without it. Today I want to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart, which is why I made this channel, why I love reading, and it's why reading is so important to me. It is truly so crucial to your intelligence, your development through childhood, and your cognition. Studies from the National Literacy Trust have shown that reading it for pleasure is at an all-time low. No, like as a hobby, it's declining, especially in young people. And that really frightens me. I read as soon as I could. When I was a child, I obviously read picture books, and that developed into, middle grade novels. I had some of my favorite books to this day are still middle grade because they truly shaped me as a person. I definitely had a bit of a wave journey, a bit of an ebb and flow with my reading in secondary school. As all teenagers do, you go, I hate reading, I don't want to read. But it's always been a near and dear to my heart. And even if I didn't want to read, I would still think about the books that I had read as a child and how much they meant to me. And in the past, like 5 or 6 years, I've really gone back into my reading. I love it. There was a phase where I would read like 100 books a year. Now I'm very much just not able to do that physically, but I still see the value in it. I think it's taught me so much, and I think it's shaped me as a person. And I think it's scary to think that there's people that haven't had that experience and what their brains must look like compared to mine or people that do read a lot. I just would like to also state before we get into the meat of the video that there's a few myths around reading that I think are really harmful. You don't have to read smart, intelligent, dense fiction books and loads of classics and insanely philosophical books all the time for reading to have an extremely positive impact on your brain. You can read anything, any books you want. You could read romance, fantasy, thrillers, non-fiction, fan fiction, anything. Any reading in any form can play a crucial role in how your brain neural connections work. And it's just so important. I cannot stress that enough. So if you're sitting here thinking, oh, I'm not smart enough to read, you truly are. And over time, you will reach the level of reading insanely dense 1,000-page classics because of how much reading can help your intelligence and your focus. So I'd just like to start by sharing a few studies that show the benefits of reading quite concisely in a little bit of a nutshell. If you don't want to watch past this part, you can just stop, and you know that there's research to support this. In 2022, the OECD reported that reading enjoyment is more important for a child's educational success than their socioeconomic background. So your entire home life and your class and your status plays less of a role on how well you perform academically than just reading for fun. That is scientific evidence that there is so much evidence to show that reading can truly build your education like no other hobby, like nothing else. Nothing else is as important, in my opinion, but also in the OECD's opinion. In 2006, Clark and Rumbold reviewed and researched a lot of literary studies, and they identified a list of several main benefits that reading for enjoyment has. So I'm going to just read them off because I can't remember them all off the top of my head. They help reading attainment and writing ability, text comprehension and grammar, the breadth of vocabulary, positive reading attitudes, greater self-confidence as a reader, pleasure in reading later in life, general knowledge, a better understanding of other cultures, community participation, and a greater insight into the human nature and decision making. The National Literary Trust said not reading as children places them at a greater risk of unemployment and poor health as an adult. The University of Cambridge reported that pleasure reading in childhood reports greater cognitive performance and mental well-being in adolescence. And whilst I was kind of researching for this video, I watched a video by Murphy Napier discussing what the effect that reading has on your brain. And she showed some studies that said reading engages the left temporal cortex of the brain, which is associated with language, facts, and memory. And it also helps to create heightened connectivity, which means that readers can more easily connect facts to other facts and their experiences to other experiences to build a bigger picture and a bigger perspective a lot quicker than people who don't read for enjoyment. So I'm going to split the rest of the video into sections. My first one is about how reading can build empathy. So, when you're reading, especially fiction novels, but any autobiography, anything that speaks about life experience, you're going into the shoes of someone else who has a completely different background to you, a completely different lifestyle. They may be a different gender, they may be a different race, they may be of a different class, and you're experiencing every novel you read an entirely new perspective, an entirely new life experience, and it opens a reader's mind up to how varied the world is. Obviously, as humans, we rely on our own experience. Everything that we've grown up and been surrounded by, we believe is the norm. And unless you intentionally research other life experiences, you research other walks of life, you're not going to have that same perspective and that same empathy. If you've seen all of these other experiences through the novels that you've read, when you come across people that have struggles, you come across people that have different beliefs than you come across people that are suffering, you can have a greater empathy for them because you know to some extent what they're going through. You can understand, even if you can't relate and you don't know how they feel, you can understand that it's different to you and that you have a role in helping them or in conversing with them or in researching their culture greater so that you can better understand them. And this skill of gaining empathy applies heavily to real life. If you're in an argument with someone else, whilst we would all be quick to anger, you can also maybe try and understand where they're coming from better because you have greater empathy. You have an ability to step into someone else's shoes and experience life through their eyes. So if just because they have contrasting views to you doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. A lot of the time you can get an argument with someone who is just malicious, but a lot of the time when you're debating topics with someone, you're better at debating with them because you can acknowledge their alternative experiences have brought them to this place of their beliefs, and your experiences have brought you to your place. And so you're better equipped at discussing and debating with other people because you have already come across so many different protagonists and antagonists that have varying different beliefs to you. Because of a lot of sometimes sadness you'll see in novels, you'll see a lot of characters experience traumas, you'll see a lot of characters experience difficulties, perhaps because of their socioeconomic background in the novel or because of the way they've grown up with their family. Like there's so many different variables that affect a character or in real life a person. In real life, it just translates so well. You're more in tune to politics because you've seen how different power dynamics in different fantasy books have affected the kingdoms or the wider population. In real life, it makes people more aware of political issues and you're less prone to the desensitization of violence. Greatly because of technology and social media, you can see wars and conflicts and then scroll and see someone get ready. Society, as of recently, but it's been coming on for quite a while, has become so desensitized to violence, but because of the greater empathy that you can gain as a reader, you can fight against that a bit more. You're less prone to just not being bothered, and you can actually do your research and gain your own political views. You also become less malleable to propaganda and harmful political standpoints because you've seen it in dystopian novels. You've seen the journey that world leaders can take from democracy to dictatorship. So you just become much more aware of the political environment, you become much more aware of the people around you. And I think people that don't read have to come to that conclusion in a very different way. That is the main reason, in my opinion, that reading is so essential to development, because it makes you a kinder and a more open-minded person. The second topic I'd like to discuss is the breadth of information you learn as a reader, the boost in your knowledge and intelligence. Not necessarily intelligence, because I wouldn't say intelligence is general knowledge, but just the pure amount of new things you can learn just by reading fiction or books that you think are so fun. When you're reading a novel, obviously the characters aren't real, but the author is. The author is sharing their own experience and their perspectives through their characters. Oftentimes, authors might be writing about things that they've never experienced, but they research so in depth that they have all of this wealth of knowledge to share with their readers. I'm just going to share one quick example, which is a book I read recently called Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's about an astronaut. Taylor Jenkins Reid is an author, not an astronaut, but she had to research so much about NASA, about astronaut processes, like how does someone go from a normal human to flying in space? Like, how do you get there? And she researched that. She researched so much into NASA. And the amount of stuff I learned about how specifically NASA works as an organization, but how most flight control decks work, how missions work, is so, like, I never would have learned that. Space has always been interesting to me, but I'm not the one to just sit and research random topics, which I'm trying to actively do now because I want to know. In my entire childhood, I was never going to sit down for hours and research niche topics, but I would read books. And from the characters and the research that the authors have put into their books, you learn so much without even realizing. Authors hone their craft and immerse themselves in the topic they're writing about. So you are truly learning from an expert. And it's such a nice, succinct way of gaining knowledge, because a book, yeah, it might be 300 to 400 pages, but imagine sitting down for hours and hours and hours going to loads of different sources when you've got a book right there where it's all in one. It can inspire you to find your interest. You can read a book and be like, oh my goodness, I love learning about earthquakes. There was an earthquake in this book and it was so interesting to me. Let's research earthquakes, and you might go on to be a geologist. Who knows? It's truly, I think it just broadens your horizon so much to all these different avenues that you could go down that you most likely never would have encountered otherwise. A huge one is reading and how that leads to your gaining in critical thinking skills. As I said earlier, when talking about empathy, you obviously encounter many different perspectives when you're reading a novel, and they're usually very different to your own life. When you're growing up, you're surrounded by people who influence your personality, influence your beliefs. So most likely a lot of your family or a lot of your friends are going to share similar beliefs to you because that's how you've grown up. So you're influenced to feel the same. But when you're reading, you encounter all these hundreds of different people who have very different perspectives on life, very different beliefs, very different standpoints, and you are able to discern who you agree with and disagree with. You might encounter a character who you think is completely morally wrong, and you might encounter one who you think, oh, I agree with them. And so you're able to use your brain and utilize your neurons to see what you agree with, what you disagree with. You never think about, oh, who am I? What do I believe? Because everyone else around you kind of believes the same thing. I'm speaking very generally. Obviously, there's going to be people who have friends who have different political beliefs to them, or different moral beliefs to them, or different religious beliefs. But on the whole, a reader is going to encounter many more people like that than someone who doesn't. It exposes you to so many different situations and experiences where you can reflect and think, how would I respond if I was in this situation? Versus how does the character respond, or how does the author think we should respond? It really engages your brain to the point where you're thinking about what you would do. You're thinking about, is this right? Is this wrong? Rather than just accepting everything as fact. It also teaches you to be open-minded and considerate. You might see someone react in a certain way and you can understand why they as a character will, because you've read their whole life, but you would react differently, and you can see that and you can appreciate the differences. I think the risk of not being open-minded and not being considerate is that you end up becoming ignorant and somewhat uneducated, because if you're so unwilling to consider someone else's point of view that you just think you are always right and you are never ever, everyone else that opposes you is wrong, that's ignorance. You're never going to be able to have debates and discussions with other people or to become more educated if you're just unwilling to accept that in situations you may be wrong or you may be right. Another way that you kind of learn how to think more critically is the authors tend to foreshadow things. They tend to show and not tell, to engage the reader, but also to engage your brain. You figure things out. You see characters do certain things and you're like, oh, then maybe that means this is going to happen. Or you see an author point something out and you think to yourself, oh, that means XYZ is going to happen. You're not being spoon-fed information. It almost teaches you resilience to not know what's happening, but read on anyway and figure it out for yourself. You're not just given everything. You don't just accept everything as a fact. You question and you think, why has this happened? And that is a skill that is so, so key to every aspect of life. When you're learning at school, it encourages you to engage with the topic more because you're actually interested in what's going on. You're thinking, why is he doing this? Why is this a fact? How did they find this out? If you're, if we get to a point in life where you're exposed to propaganda or you're exposed to leaders telling you what you should think, your critical thinking is going to help you because you're going to know, oh, well, why has he made this claim? Why has she made this claim? Is there any scientific reasoning behind this? Is this right? Does this align with my views? It just leads to more questions, and that questioning things and considering how you interpret things is so important in all of the aspects in life. It will help you in your career because, you know, you could be told by a boss to do this certain thing and you think, oh, actually this way would be easier, and you converse and you help other people. It is so important, and I think reading is one of the key ways to learn this. Quite a simple one, but a very, I think, important one is that it expands your vocabulary. The amount of words that the average reader knows versus the average non-reader is significant. I couldn't even tell you words I have learned from a book versus words I haven't. All I know is I was in year 3 and I was talking and my mum would be like, what does that mean? And it's not like I just read a book and then Googled the word. Because you learn how to think critically and you learn inference skills when you're reading a book, you might not even Google the word, but the word in the context of the sentence, the definition becomes somewhat clear. And, you know, later on you may use it incorrectly and someone goes, what are you talking about? And you look it up and you find out the real definition. But overall, even if you're not looking going, oh, that's a new word, I don't know, I'm going to learn that. As you read, subconsciously, all of these words are entering your mind, and eventually the more you see them, the more you're going to understand them. I'm not trying to brag about me as a person. My point is, your vocabulary will become much more sophisticated. You'll learn so many new words. You'll be able to articulate yourself a lot better because you read characters articulate their inner thoughts for hundreds and hundreds of pages at a time. The UCL Institute of Education did a study and found out that people who read for fun know on average 26% more words than people who don't. And if you think about the English language as a whole, 26% of every single word, it is such a huge breadth of words that to know 26% more words than anyone else is significant. That might seem like a small percentage, but in the context of the English language, it is a large amount. The last thing I wanted to talk about, which I think is very relevant to the society we live in, is how reading affects your attention span. Attention spans are declining by the minute at the moment. I mean, I'm a victim to it. It's one of the things I'm really trying to work on in the last few weeks. As I've been researching for this video, I've been realizing, do I have a good attention span? And no, I don't. I always have to have music on in the background. I always have to have something on whilst I'm doing something else. I can never sit and do something. I used to read watching booktube videos or read listening to music. And whilst I think listening to music is the least concerning background noise, it would get to points where I would be watching a movie and then I would scroll on my phone at the same time because I couldn't focus on one without the other. And that's when it gets a bit scary. Long form content is my savior because I love YouTube so much. I can sit down for an hour, 2 hour long video, but a lot of people can't. Everyone watches everything on 2 times speed. If you look at movies now versus the classic films were slow moving. There wasn't loads going on all of the time. If you look at a film now, there's always so much action. Even in a romance film, they're always doing something. They move quickly from scene to scene. Actors always have to be talking. It's just society on the whole. I'm not just talking about social media or technology. Western society has sped up. It's gotten so much faster. Everyone moves so fast, no one stops to think. And therefore, attention spans have just declined, shattered so badly. They have gotten so much worse. Reading is one of the few things that you can do now that will help lengthen your attention span, because you sit there and you can't put 2 times speed on the words unless you just skim over the book, that's not even reading because you're not reading the book, you're just flitting around. You have to read every word. So obviously reading speed varies from reader to reader, but it's not going to be that much different. And even people who read fast are still reading every word. So to them, that's still building their attention span. You can't just skip. You can't skip 10 seconds if it gets boring, because then you won't know what's going on. You have to sit there and read. And for me, the average book takes anywhere between 4 to 8 hours to read. That's a lot of hours to spend doing one thing. And obviously you can put music in the background. You can spread it out. You don't read it all in one sitting. But reading as a practice, if you implement it into your daily routine, will really help you to just sit back, process, and relax. And then as you develop a longer attention span, it means you can easily focus on other things. When you're doing your revision or schoolwork, you don't get distracted after 30 minutes and go and do something else. You can sit there for a couple hours and just do some really good work and then leave it for the day. You don't have to be revising for 10 hours a day to gain knowledge. You just have to have good focus for a few hours. So that was my little spiel about reading. I just think this message is so important and more people need to be saying it. I love reading. I love it because of the fact that it's a bit of escapism for me, that I get to learn so much, but I also love it because it is so crucial to my development. I know for a fact I would not be where I am today if I hadn't started reading for fun as a child. My levels of cognition, intelligence, and my development as a person, my morals and values would be different. They eventually probably would have got there, but I just think reading excels it so much, and it is such a good tool in growing as a person. So I'll see you in the next one. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.